All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Peace Awesome. I am the moderator today, and we have a panel as the first session today as part of the symposium. Thank you for coming, and I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, if this is a webinar, so please check your settings if you need to. You shouldn't need to mute yourself, again, because it is a webinar format, so everybody who's not a panelist should be automatically muted. However, you can always check your settings to make sure that it is set up how you would like. The presentation today is called Digging In with Data. It is about the experiences from a paid summer internship program for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LIS students across the United States. Our panelists are participants from kind of halfway participants from the first year, and the other half are participants for the second year. They're going to talk about different aspects of the program, but briefly, I'll just kind of show on the screen what they're going to cover, including the projects that they've completed, publications that they've put out, and other very interesting things. About NCDS, if you haven't heard of us, we support NIH priorities in data. So the NLM goals around accelerating discovery and advancing health, and building a workforce for data-driven research and health. We work toward developing that capacity for supporting data science and data services within the health information community. We also coordinate efforts and partner with other organizations to maximize that impact. And we have a number of offerings, including trainings, webinars, and so on, resources online for beginners, for people looking for further development if they're already practicing data librarians, and then those who are looking for resources at their point of need. The topic of the presentation today is our summer internship. It is an applicant process, and we are focused on kind of the ability to provide data services as it's now part of many job openings and new opportunities in health sciences, academic, and honestly, even public and other types of libraries. The goal of the NCDS internship program is to give practical experiences that include soft and hard skills that are needed to enter the data librarian role or even working with data in their librarian roles. These include working on a team, understanding the data lifecycle, working with data, and so on. And in an effort to diversify the profession, we provide internships to introduce students from historically excluded racial and ethnic groups to data librarianship. And these are paid internships that are 10 weeks during the summer and offer the opportunity for working on a structured data-related project. And so their practical experiences not only include that project, but also training and networking opportunities in order for them to have the skills and the relationships to move their careers forward. Currently, which was originally due to the pandemic, these are all remotely completed, but we do have regular check-ins and discussions online. However, we do hope to kind of branch into more areas of possibilities in the future, possibly including a site visit or a large gathering of former and current internship participants at MLA. But coming up, our applications will open March 1st. And so that's all I'm going to cover today. Of course, I'm happy to answer questions, and my contact information will be at the end. But let's hear from our panel of former participants who can speak to their work and what they've accomplished. The person who's starting is Andrea Parkman, who's going to go ahead and go first. Welcome, Andrea. Oh, you're muted.
All right, there we go. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll be presenting on my experience as an NCDS intern. Okay. All right. So about myself, my name is Andrea Parkman. I was a participant in the first cohort. the first cohort of the NCDS data internship during the summer 2022. I'm a recent MLIS graduate from Louisiana State University, and I currently work at Tulane's Rudolph Mattis Library of the Health Science in the Interlibrary Loan Department. Librarianship as a second career has led me to meet brilliant, hardworking professionals. So I'm very happy to be here with you and to share in the combined excellence represented here today. Next slide will be. So for my objectives today, I will be sharing my experience at the NCDS and focusing specifically on the partnership between my project site with the Data Creation Network, or the DCN. As well, I will discuss the collaboration in creation of an open access resource guide for data librarianship. One really fascinating attribute of the internship was the dual engagement between the NCDS and our project sites. As I mentioned, my project site was the DCN. Throughout the internship, I worked closely with a number of networked organizations, their network organizations and curators, and I worked my project, which would be the final output of the internship. So what is the Data Curation Network? It's a member-based network comprised of both academic and nonprofit organizations. The members collaborate to steward research data for future use. They do this by employing the expertise of every member institution and their curators. As a working system of many members, the DCN matches the submitted data to the right curator across the network organization. So the end result is a strengthened curation for each unique data submitted by their members. At the time of my internship, there were 16 members. This has grown to 19 members, which is impressive, especially because the DCN is focused strongly on sustainable growth. They strive for long-term viability and success. One thing that became clear during the course of my internship was that they were able to accomplish as much as they do because they stay cognizant of the entirety of their network and their members. Next slide. So what did I do at the DCN? My chosen project at the DCN was to begin the development of a research paper to investigate the desirable characteristics of generalist institutional data repository. At the DCN, interns worked with the director of the DCN, Michaela Narlock, and the internship coordination, Shauna Taylor, as well as with 5 other mentors from various member institutions. One of the mentors that I worked with primarily as she structured my project was Scott Calvert. I touched bases with her often as the project progressed and spent most of my time as the intern researching, investigating, and meeting with mentors as I teased apart institutional data repositories and what makes them desirable for use. For the culmination of the research, I participated in roundtables discussions in a 2-day meeting between myself and several mentors. As the direct education from the DCN, all interns were assigned a set of required readings and trainings. The content introduced the FAIR principles, CARE principles for Indigenous data, the anti-racist research methods, along with various other topics. In addition to the projects, we attended the all-hands meeting at the DCN, which was both a business meeting and a professional development outreach for their community. As well, we were invited to submit blog entries about our participation, which gave us the opportunity to compose something less formal that summarized our experience with the DCN. The DCN was a really excellent project site for me, and I learned so much from so many. Next slide. So why was the DCN excellent for the data internship? The reason why the organization worked so well with us was the structure. The DCN is oriented to focus on education efforts. They're committed to education and teaching data creation. The framework in which the interns for my cohort operated was structured for growth and development. They weaved scholarship within all we did. They are committed to growing and building their community. They wanted to enable us to do our best and to be our best, and this dedication to us as interns was empowering. Their style of membership of mentorship translated to training the data librarians of the future. Also, their role within the larger internship worked seamlessly with what we were learning with the NCDS, which gave the partnership this synergetic feel. Their vision and values aligned with what the direct mentors at the NCDS were teaching and developing in us throughout the internship. Lastly, they wanted to foster long-lasting relationships. One of my colleagues from the first cohort has contributed to several projects after the internship concluded, as well as that the last cohort of interns they hosted 2-semester-long projects arose out of that relationship with the NCDS interns. I am currently working with the DCN on a related topic to my project that will be submitted for publication soon. As an intern, I found that the quintessential characteristics of the DCN were the people, and it's what made my time with them so impactful. Another important outcome that came from the internship was a data librarianship resource guide. It's an open access collaborative web publication. The following slides have the QR code to access the document that was born during the internship, and I'll spend a few minutes discussing it. So what was the climate for the creation? As one of the interns summers 2022, there were reoccurring questions that the interns and I asked. What are the resources that will aid us into entering the field of data librarianship? What are the listservs? Where do I find data? What do I read? What conferences do I attend? During each of the sessions, whether it was orientation or workshops or check-ins, the same questions came up over and over again. Everyone was hungry to learn and advance and enter data librarianship, but they were limited by this information need, guiding them to the right resource, the right conference, the right conversation. There were clear barriers, and many of us just didn't know where to go or who to ask. So again and again, I heard my colleagues asking for guidance. This thirst for enrichment and development largely reflected my own internal monologue. So how do I do this? I don't know where to go either. Who can provide me with the information? So within this environment of needing key information and resources about data librarianship, I started to take notes each time the question was asked in its many forms and recording the many answers. As I worked with the different mentors, I made sure to ask each mentor for a research a research for data librarianship. So what is the resource? I ended up with this list of resources. I was excited about having it, but more excited about sharing it. I couldn't keep it to myself, so I started compiling the books and the listservs into a document. I somehow developed my own independent project. I organized the listed resources, and the list was growing. Mentors from both the DCN and the NCDS responded to the call for contribution, and over the summer, they filled in the gaps so that there was a cohesive answer to our questions. What do I do? What do I do? Where do I go? The document functioned as a living document built for collaboration, where the resources of data librarianship could live outside the established persons in the field. Its structure is reminiscent to a LibGuide and acts as a toolbox to help new data librarians link to resources that will support and strengthen their path. At the end of the summer, as part of the internship, I chose to present this research guide to my peers as part of my assigned check-in I hosted. Since the end of the internship, Peace has worked to make the document available in the Zenodo repository and updates it as new resources become available. So what was an unassigned independent project resulted in a document that meets an information need for entering professionals in the field. And as I said, there's the QR code is on the slides for you guys both to access that. So in conclusion, the concluding remarks I have, the important lessons I took home was, by working with the DCN and on the research guide, I learned many things. The highlights of my education during the internship was really not about data. That fact still surprises me. When I look at the most important things from the internship, I really focus on about the people and about how working together, we can achieve more. What is more important than how we disseminate, curate, and preserve data is the people that we connect with and team up to reach these goals of moving the field further. I learned about building and investing in our peers. I learned the importance of developing next generations of librarians, just as much as I was invested in during the internship. I left with a sense of being supported and valued. Having had mentors that added to my base of knowledge has impacted much of everything I've done since the internship. I learned a lot about initiative and innovating and working as part of a team. It was a positive experience that has developed many skills in me that will continue to help me into the future. So thank you.
Everyone. My name is Robert. I'll be talking today about my work with the National Evaluation Center Data Warehouse. Next slide, please. So first things first, I wanted to start off with a brief introduction of myself. I'm a recent graduate of USC's LIS program after having years of working within a law library circulation department. Yeah, so all my previous library experience is within law libraries, and I was really first exposed to data while working with usage stats within Excel and just analyzing that very briefly just within the Excel sandbox. But after that task and after enrolling in USC, I came across this internship with NCDS and about data librarianship. And I saw how hands-on it was and how practical it was. And I thought it was the perfect opportunity to really dive deeper into data while also developing new skills for myself. And even though, my background is within law libraries, I feel like all the skills and experiences within the internship would definitely be applicable to what I'd be doing day to day, especially with all the usage stats. And of course, just driving the library forward, data is very important. So I just definitely wanted to dive into this internship. Next slide, please. So some background on the project I did with the NEC. First and foremost, I had to answer a research question with data stored from the NNLM data warehouse, essentially using data science methods to draw out the data and tell a story, answer a question, and create a visualization from that data. So a little bit about the data warehouse. It stores NNLM data from the early 2000s through today. So as you can imagine, the data points are massive. It's just the number of data stored there is going to be, so much to do. But I essentially want to focus my presentation on a few different areas within the data warehouse, mostly from learning about the subaward projects that the NNLM hosted and the activities completed by the staff. Next slide, please. So just to provide an example of what a subaward activity is and the data stored within the data warehouse, the Black Health and Healing Summit was an activity conducted February 5th, 2021. This was hosted by Queens Public Library and the Black Caucus of the ALA. It was a 24-hour live virtual event that paired entertainment with critical health information for people viewing the event, the Health Summit. It really just focused on providing health education, especially among Black communities, obviously that were affected by COVID-19 the hardest. And just to provide an example of some of the data collected within the data warehouse provided by the conductor of the activity. Of course, the number of attendees, which is very important, so people can know how many people were there. Of course, the effectiveness of the event hosted by the conductor, and then of course, a description of the event. So with all this in mind and the focus of my project, I drafted a research question. Next slide, please. My research question was very basic. It was basically how successful have subaward activities been from 2018 through 2021? Now, I said earlier that the data stored was from all the way back in early 2000s, and I didn't really want to overwhelm myself, especially being brand new with data analysis and in the field. So I decided to focus on the past 3 years. The data that I analyzed essentially was reported by the conductor of the activity. So as you can imagine, it's a bit subjective based on what the conductor felt, how successful the event went. And this data point was rated numerically, 1 being not at all, 2 being slightly successful, 3 being moderately, and then of course 5, 4, and 5 being very and extremely successful. So with this in mind, I used a few different skills, especially with data analysis, to analyze all the data points that I had. And I just wanted to show you my findings in the next slide. Yeah, so these were my findings as far as number of subboard activities that took place from 2018 to 2021, and then of course how successful all of these were from 2018 through 2021. My visualization here shows that the majority of the events in these years were rated as very successful by the conductors of the activities, with only 14 total being rated as slightly successful or lower than that. We see their one in 2019 was rated as not at all successful. So I wonder how that one went. Yeah, so I was actually pleasantly surprised by my findings, to see that the conductors thought that a lot of their activities went well and they really reached a portion that they were aiming to reach. So this was pleasantly surprised, and I was grateful to hear these results. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk about the skills needed for the project that I completed. SQL is definitely a big portion of the project, writing SQL statements to query the database and extract data from the data warehouse. Again, I didn't have any previous experience with data analysis or these hard skills, so this was definitely a learning curve involved, and it kind of took some trial and error, but of course, with the help of everyone here within the internship, I kind of was able to analyze the data and essentially answer my own research question. Also got some skills with Python. So I utilized Python to create a script, and that actually helped query the data as well. That wasn't essentially a big part of the project, but of course it was a skill that was very useful. Of course, it kind of got me thinking of writing scripts in general, just in my daily day-to-day workplace. So it really got that in my mind, just automating different things and just the power of Python. It was definitely a great experience there. My favorite actually was using Tableau to create visualizations from the extracted data. The previous slide was actually an example of a visualization that I created. Peace herself actually taught us. We had a session that she taught us how to use Tableau, and it was actually really fun. So that was definitely a skill that I just enjoyed learning more about. Excuse me. So yeah, Tableau was really fun. I enjoyed using that. And next slide, please. Yeah, so learning to code. This was definitely, like I mentioned, a skill that I had no previous experience with. It was quite a difficult process, but I got a baseline proficiency throughout the 10 weeks. Guidance through mentors was definitely a big part of learning to code. I mean, as I mentioned, Peace and all the others throughout the internship were there to guide us throughout the whole process. And any question I had with this hard skills, they were definitely there to answer, like no matter how small they were. Also had instructional sections throughout the internship. Week to week, we covered different skills. As I mentioned, we covered Tableau one week, Python another week, and it was very hands-on and allowed us to learn while having our mentors there to answer any questions that we had. And then, of course, self-study was a big one, right? We live in an age where there's so much information available online, YouTube videos, online courses, and then, of course, Andrea kind of hit it on the head there with her resource guide. That's a great resource to learn more on your own with whatever question that you have. So I was grateful to have all of this. So I was able to kind of receive a baseline proficiency within the 10 weeks of the program. Next slide, please. And some lessons learned for me as far as data analysis and just being a data librarian in general. Data is not always going to be perfect and ready to use right out of the box. That kind of leads me to my next point. Data cleaning is a major part of the data analysis process. As I mentioned, the subaward activities were self-reported by the conductors of the activities. So they're not always going to be reporting things in a way that's ready to analyze right out of the box, which kind of leads me to data cleaning becoming a major part of the process, because there were a few times where I had to essentially make sure it was readable and able to analyze. Of course, there's always something new to learn. That's a very key tenet within librarianship in general. Just always kind of keeping in mind of being a constant learner throughout your life. I'm definitely going to keep that going forward. Next slide, please. And some practices still used today that I picked up from this internship. One, of course, as I kind of hinted at in the previous slide, tidy data is extremely important, right? You want to make sure the data is readable for you as a user, but then also that you can analyze the data there very easily, and that it's usable for the different programs that you would use, whether that's SQL, Python, or Excel. You want to hit that balance where the user of the data can easily read it themselves and it makes sense to a human, but then also it plays well with the different machines that you'll be using. SQL, of course, was a big skill that I picked up within this internship. I actually kind of used our own LIS analytics program ourselves in our library today. So that actually uses SQL to query the database of our own usage statistics. So I do pick up that skill and I do use that to this day. Of course, scripting in Python throughout this internship really just put the frame of mind that I can automate different repetitive tasks, and I do that today in my job at the law library. Then, of course, making all the data that I record digestible for everyone. That includes, making visualizations that make sense for everyone, no matter their skill set or their level of data proficiency. Yeah, and that's all I have for today. So thank you all.
Hi, my name is Rachel Priestman Marquez. I am a current student at UNC Chapel Hill, and in the summer of 2023, I had the pleasure of working with NCDS and the Data Curation Network. So Andrea talked a little bit about the Data Curation Network, so I'll talk a little bit about my specific project, which was different from hers. So for summer of 2023, our cohort's assignment was to build a primer using Git and GitHub. The DCN hosts a wide variety of primers, and they define a primer in their own words as a peer-reviewed living document that details a specific subject, disciplinary area, or a curation task, and can be used as a reference to curate research data. These primers are hosted on GitHub, and they span a wide variety of different genres, from concepts like consent forms and human participants data essentials and accessibility, to information about how to use really tangible tools like R, Jupyter Notebook, MATLAB, and so many others. So you can see the full list of primers available on this slide. And if you're working on any of these tools or with any of these concepts, I highly, highly recommend taking a look at these primers. And our fearless internship leader, Peace, actually worked on the Adobe Acrobat primer herself. And as interns at the DCN, this is where the majority of our work took place for the summer 2023 cohort. And the next primer that the DCN wanted to work on was to create a primer about Git, which is the primer that we helped to develop for our internship. This particular project had 3 interns, and they wanted us to touch on 3 major points. 1 being the distinction between Git and GitHub, 2, the limitations of GitHub, and 3, how we might use Git and GitHub as curation tools. In our research, we found a lot of information and learned a lot about the discourse that was happening regarding GitHub as a tool for open access, and particularly the problems with longevity and preservation with Git and GitHub. So in our first section, we really fleshed out the distinction and history between Git and GitHub. Git was created in 2005 as a distributed version control system, which simply means that it tracks changes on a set of files on a computer. This software was created by Linus Torvalds while he and his team of software developers were creating the Linux kernel. And during their development, they had been working on another proprietary version control system called BitKeeper. And during their development, BitKeeper revoked their free license, and the Linux kernel team struggled to find a version control system that had all of the tools that fit their needs. So they created their own, and Git was born as a result of that. GitHub was founded in 2008 and is a web-based platform built on top of Git. It serves as a hosting service for software development projects that use Git for version control. And GitHub enhances collaboration by offering features like really useful features like pull requests, issue tracking, continuous integration, and wikis for repositories, making it a central hub for developers to work together on projects. So while Git is the version control system, Git is the platform that hosts the repositories managed by Git. Git is a command line tool that can be used locally on a developer's machine, while GitHub is a web-based platform that provides a graphical interface for managing Git repositories. Git is the underlying technology, and then GitHub adds a layer of collaboration and project management tools. So after that information in our primer, we talked about the limitations of Git and GitHub. Some minor limitations include the ease of use, storage, and file size. If you're not familiar with Git or GitHub, it can be a bit of a learning curve. Git uses a command line interface to perform tasks and has its own syntax, which can take a while to adjust to. This can also pose a problem because Git requires a key to push a repository to GitHub. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can easily make your key public, which can cause a lot of privacy concerns. In addition, there are constraints on individual file sizes and the size of the repository overall on GitHub, which is another constraint. But by far, the biggest problem facing Git and GitHub currently is longevity and preservation. As we know, a lot of published research either requires scholars to create code or use pre-existing code obtained through open science collaboration. These GitHub repositories are linked to and are vital for many scholars, but GitHub doesn't have a system for creating uniform resource identifiers or URIs, which means that these links are not stable and the content of these links can change very dramatically. One of the things that we talked about extensively in our internship is that in 2021, 1 out of 5 publications in the archive corpus led or included a URI to GitHub, which is not meant to be the final resting place for the data. This causes a huge problem called reference rot, where a link to a URI is just dead. And when looking specifically at publications with a web reference, 7 out of 10 web references in science, technology, and medicine publications are affected by reference rot. And even more suffer from context migration, which is where a page was linked and that information landscape has changed dramatically and no longer points to the information that the author intended it to point to. And we can see how this would be a problem when we're talking about high stakes information landscapes. And we say that GitHub isn't a final resting place for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that there's no guarantee that GitHub will continue as a viable business option in the future. And there's precedent for this, considering the fact that GitHub competitors Gitorious and Google Code are now both discontinued. GitHub is taking a strong first step. In 2020, they launched the GitHub Archival Program, and they captured a snapshot of every active public repository on February 2nd, 2020. Those millions of repos were then archived and hardened to film designed to last for 1,000 years and stored in the GitHub Arctic Code Vault in a decommissioned coal mine deep beneath an Arctic mountain in Norway. This is one piece of the puzzle, but from my own personal research, I don't see any way for the general public to access these archives, and this necessitates some other options. One of the really great readings that I found while in this internship is a Sloan-funded project called Investigating and Archiving the Scholarly Git Experience, or IASGE. And they focus on a couple of main ways to preserve repositories, including self-preservation, programmatic captures, web archiving, and general software preservation. But the recommendations are not only to self-archive through 2 different means, one being a generalist repository and an institutional repository, but they also recommend linking those out to the Software Heritage Archive as well. And these 3 different means of preservation should be sufficient to stop reference rot, context migration, and total loss of data. And so as you can see, just from like the little bit that we talked about here, we didn't even get into curation. This primer became pretty unwieldy pretty quickly. So currently the primer is being split into 2 primers, one for the context and curation regarding Git and another for context and curation regarding GitHub. So Seth Erickson will be doing the Git and Vicky Rampin will be doing the GitHub one. And then really quickly, as Andrea was talking about continued work with the Data Curation Network, my summer internship ended there, but I was also fortunate enough to complete a field experience with the DCN in my fall semester for 2023. And so in that experience, I was able to help create some visualizations based on Andrea's research. And you can see really quickly the growth of data sets and institutional repositories and institutional data repositories. And this is so important in the wake of the Nelson and Holdren memos that necessitate that all taxpayer-funded research is open and accessible to the public. So hopefully we'll be able to continue some more of this research through NCDS and the DCN. And if you're interested in some of those numbers about reference rot, and context migration. You can check out these references, but now Katya is going to talk to you about her experience at the Curie Institute.
All right, thank you for that, Rachel. So hi, everybody. My name is Katya. I use pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a current MLIS student at Syracuse University, set to graduate this coming May. And today I'm going to talk about my experience being hosted at the Curie Institute of Ecosystem Studies this past summer. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for the agenda, I'll be talking a little bit about the research the Curie Institute does, the work I did over the summer, and then talk a little bit about our experience with writing a proposal for a conference. So go ahead, please. Thank you. So the Curie Institute, as the mission statement says, they generate rigorous scientific knowledge about ecological systems and their importance to human well-being. So it's a really large research institution. And there were 3 interns being hosted by the Curie Institute, and we were all working at the Hahn Lab, which is run by Dr. Barbara Hahn, specifically on the project Ecology for Infectious Disease, which aims to predict the next disease outbreak. I've included the hyperlink here for those of you who are interested to take a look at the work that they do. There's also a really great video where Dr. Hahn talks a lot more about the work that her and her team does, so definitely check it out. So within the realm of, sorry, can you go back one more piece? Thank you. Within the realm of predicting disease outbreaks, they're tasked with identifying animals that amplify disease, as well as predicting and preventing the next pandemic. So moving on to talking about what the internship was. Next slide, please, at data exploration. So this is very much what we were doing. Unlike the other projects that were happening over the summer, we didn't really have a set output or something that we are working towards publishing or creating. We were instead given 3 different data sets. So we weren't really working on the same project either. I will talk a little bit more about that later. And instead, we were given these data sets, and we were supposed to identify relationships and trends amongst the data and use RStudios to create data visualizations and essentially report back to the Curie Institute on what we found to help guide what they would look at next. So with that, thank you. So I was specifically looking at alpha viruses. So next slide, please. What exactly are alpha viruses? So they are viruses transmitted through mosquitoes. So I have a list here of what my data set included, such as syndibus and chikungunya. But why exactly was it important that we looked at them? Well, it's because alpha viruses are incredibly understudied, even though they have quite a wide geographical distribution. So it really just highlighted the importance of analyzing the data that we have now to allow for further studies and for further understanding. So looking at it a little bit further, next slide, please. My project goal was to compile current knowledge of alpha viruses in mammals, so not in humans, and explore dataset relationships using these data visualizations. So at the beginning of my internship, I was given a mostly complete data set, and this information was compiled using Gideon. So it's this massive online network with all of these scientific research papers. So Curie essentially went through and got all of these research papers for us and put it into this data set. So I say mostly complete because not every single column was filled out with information. So a large portion of what I did was essentially data cleaning and going through and plugging in all that needed information before I could even get to the visualization stage. I also had to identify latitude and longitude coordinates of where each study took place, as one of the goals was to determine georeferenceability and then create one of those maps where we could really see the spread of these diseases and really see where these studies took place. This was also very problematic as not all studies took place in one specific generic area. So definitely problem solving was a big portion of this project too. And of course, lastly, we have using RStudio to explore and create data visualization. So that I really want to highlight as being one of the most important parts for me. I have a humanities background. I have a bachelor's in classical civilizations. I've never used R, let alone used RStudio to do any kind of data cleaning, data manipulation, or any kind of data visualization. So it was really incredible to be given this this project because Curie essentially had not done anything with the data sets before they gave it to us. So I purely got to go through that process of cleaning and also merging with other data sets to create these visualizations. And it definitely gave me that confidence boost to know that I can create these things. And it was really cool to see their feedback when they got to see the visualizations at the end. So moving on to our conference submission. So all NCDS interns are required to create, or at least for our cohort, are required to create a proposal and submit to a conference to have our work presented. So even though the three of us were working on 3 different projects, we still wanted to keep in touch with each other. So we did have weekly check-ins with just the 3 of us, which was super important. And I think it really helped alleviate some of the fears that we had coming into this project, as so between the 3 of us, we didn't really have too much experience with coding, and I don't think any of us had a scientific background. So the additional focus of where we were doing our work was foreign to us. So really having that feeling of camaraderie and being able to talk to each other about what we were feeling was definitely really important for that experience. So because of those weekly check-ins, we decided it would be a really great idea to have a presentation focusing on our experiences doing the internship. So not necessarily the output of what we did for the internship. So that really impacted what conferences we wanted to apply to. So NCDS was super helpful. At the beginning, they did send us a really nice list of all of those different conferences we could apply to if we wanted to, a bunch of regional conferences and medical library conferences. But we decided in the end, we wanted to apply to the Midwest Data Librarian Symposium, or MDLS for short. Just by looking at the theme and the CFPs and the call for proposals, we thought it would be a really great fit for what we wanted to do. So it was really nice because the conference was presented as an unconference, meaning that there was really no set of formats of what we had to do. It didn't have to be a lightning talk, didn't have to be a panel, didn't have to be a workshop. We could purely say what we would like to do, and they would grade it based off that. So we decided it would be great if we could do more of a roundtable discussion, so we could really engage the participants in an active discussion and conversation surrounding doing data librarianship work. So with that, we focused on these 3 main ideas of talking about managing realistic expectations for imposter syndrome, especially for those who are maybe transitioned into this area or early career. This is your first time doing this kind of work. Exploring the importance of having a mentor in this field, as well as addressing and discussing those barriers to entry to the data scholarship landscape. So this was, again, our first time submitting to a conference or just writing a proposal. So it was really great to have some support from our host site too, to be able to read over what we were writing to make sure, I guess, it made sense, and also just to alleviate some fears that we had. So with that, if we go to the next slide, please, we did end up using the evaluation rubric a lot. I just want to highlight it because I think it really helped us focus on what we wanted to write in the proposal, just to make sure that our ideas matched up really well with what MDLS was looking for. I will also say this was the only proposal that we wrote. This is the only conference that we really wanted to apply for. And I'm happy to say that we got accepted. So that was really wonderful. But yes, that really concludes what I wanted to talk about today. So thank you so much for listening. I've included my email down here too. If those of you are interested in hearing more about my experience, I'm always happy to talk. Thank you.
All right, hello. My name is Kiana. My pronouns are she, they, and I participated this past summer as well. My group, there were 3 of us. We worked with minor libraries at the University of Rochester Medical Center looking at bibliometric data. You could do the next slide. And so this project was a continuation of the work that was started by Ehsan Mogodam. He was our site mentor and liaison librarian for several of the departments there at URMC. And like initially one of his departments requested like the visualizations and a summary of their research output to add to their accreditation portfolio, but then other departments like expressed interest. And so this project was intended to capture the process of how to go about creating that output and visualizations, as well as to share them so that anyone else can do the same for their faculty. And then we used a LibGuide because that's what we had access to, and it's publicly available. And it benefits like not just the faculty requesting it for some portfolio, but also like other staff, students, and researchers. It offers like another way of looking at what that department is up to, what they're interested in, and what they're doing. Next slide. So I'm just going to walk through the process that we use to create the visualizations, show a bit from the LibGuide so you can get an idea of what's in there. And I also have the link to that later. And then talk about one of my experiences made possible by the internship of attending the MDLS conference that Katya talked about. So this project was intended to be coding light, but through some of the troubleshooting process of like figuring out how to do this and streamlining it, it ended up being more involved. But we were using BiblioShiny, which is in our Shiny package through RStudio, and it includes like this nice web-based user interface to make interacting with the data as straightforward as possible. What we really had to focus on was collecting and cleaning the data itself to upload into that. So each intern took on 2 departments. We created a researcher list from the department's webpage, and I tried out a small Python script to pull the names into a spreadsheet for me, which was cool. And then we took that list to Scopus and had to manually look everyone up and grab their author ID. And yes, there were duplicates and lots of similar names and other shenanigans that we had to sort through, but we got that cleaned up and together. And then one of my favorite parts of doing like the data collection and cleanup process was figuring out limitations. So for example, we found that downloading the data from Scopus as a CSV, while it takes up a bit more space, it actually has more complete data than was offered by the bib file, which while smaller and easier to work with in some ways, didn't have all of the same fields available. But we cleaned that data up, imported it into BiblioShiny. And then from there, it's straightforward in the sense that you can click and generate a visualization. But there are so many different types of analyses available and so many different like facets to consider, when manipulating those, that we started with the type of metrics that were previously requested by faculty and went from there. So I have a link to the LibGuide there if you'd like to see that. And then my favorite experience, one of my favorite experiences, I have lots of favorite experiences, but one of them, beyond like having this opportunity to learn and work with others and apply these new skills directly, is that our site mentor, Asan, he invited us to sit on other meetings that were part of his like data librarian related work, but not necessarily related directly to the internship. So for example, I got to sit in on a meeting where he is part of a committee in charge of the staff survey about inclusion and belonging on campus. And what they were doing was looking at last year's results, checking in to see what they got, making sure the questions were crafted well, that they were asking what they were meant to be asking, right? So like all of the very important data related things that go into survey crafting. And so it was really nice to get that behind the scenes look, or a sort of like a day in the life of data librarian work. I also had the opportunity to meet with one of the head of one of the departments that I created visualizations for and got feedback on the work that we did. Okay, if we go to the next slide. Yes, so these are just a few examples from the Health, Humanities, and Bioethics department. So for example, like we have a word cloud here. It shows the top 50 words in abstracts. The bibliometric overview at the bottom is actually from the BiblioShiny interface that's displaying that data about the data. And I'm not from a health sciences background, so I was surprised by the average number of co-authors being like 17. But then when I was like looking at the titles and the research that people were doing and like, oh, we're working in labs and that sort of thing, I was like, oh, it makes sense to have that many people working on each of these projects. And so the annual scientific production graph, it is just a simple count of the number of articles published each year, but it was something faculty really wanted to see in that over time sort of way. And then if you have the chance to peruse the LibGuide, one of the more experimental or interactive ones that we did that was hard to get into the presentation, but it was an interactive collaboration network to help show that co-authorship that's happening, like who all is working on each one, but also who is working with who. But because it generates it for all of the authors involved and not just those with affiliation at URMC, we got mixed feedback on that from faculty, because the point of creating each of these department pages is to show the output of that department. And so like having this huge network, while it's cool to see all that collaboration, without it being your MC focused, it's like, well, maybe we don't want to include that on the page. But so what was really important, or what I learned a lot about this process, is like working with your faculty, working with the people that you are doing the data analysis for, and figuring out like what they need, what they want, so it can be the most impactful. Okay, and then yeah, so the experience that was possible thanks to this internship. I got to attend MDLS, like Katja talked about. And even though my proposal wasn't accepted, people at Region 3 were gracious enough to send me anyway. And during my MLS degree, I attended quite a few conferences like ALA, PLA, ACRL, but this one was one of my favorites, not just because I got to meet my fellow interns that you can see here at Reppin. But as Katja was talking about, of it being a unconference, it was smaller. And while there were some like lectures, the sessions were like really focused on collaboration, practical application of ideas, and being able to talk to each other and learn together, and like learn from each other experiences in the work that we do. And so like there was a whole session of lessons learned where someone either shared something that went wrong and how they dealt with it, or just generally posed it to the group because it was a challenge they were facing and they hadn't had any luck figuring it out. And so being able to share those ideas and get that feedback, it was really great to get like both a better sense of the scope of all of the work that happens in data librarianship, but especially for me to see and feel the community around, even though you're working on these like seemingly niche and specific challenges, you're not alone. Like you have your peers out there and other people facing similar things, and you can work them out together. I was also very lucky because I got to connect with Jameen, who is the data librarian at the University of Kansas, who is hosting MDLS this year. So I'm getting some unconference planning experience on that committee. If you're in the Midwest area, I highly recommend attending. It'll be in October. But that is all I have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful presentations. Hopefully it gives a good understanding and insight into the the variety in all of the different types of projects, also the expertise that has been developed through participation in this internship. If you are a applicable participant, we would love for your application in March. Also, if there are other ways that you want to collaborate with NCDS, participate as a mentor, helping with some aspect of the internship, we also love to hear from you as well. Our contact information is provided here, which is ncds@nnlm.gov. And then you can read more information about the internship by visiting the nnlm.gov site and visiting the NCDS and internship pages.